Hello everyone, it's me, Aaron, Professor Thorgy, your guide to all things geeky, and welcome to another episode of Comic Class, the show every single week on this channel where we just geek out about comic books, and I'm just going to start this week's episode with an apology. I'm sorry that this week's episode is late. Normally these episodes go up on Wednesday, but this episode is going up Friday, maybe? I'm gonna say probably Saturday. You see, if you follow me on Twitter, then you already know that this week's episode is late, simply because I had a ton of doctor's appointments this week. It's nothing big, it's just one of those things where it's like you go in for a regular scheduled checkup, and they're like, alright, it's been forever since you had this tested, so we're gonna have you come in on this day for that. Also, it's been forever since you had this done, so we're gonna have you come in for that. It's just all a big thing. Point is, I'm sorry that this week's episode is late. Especially because this week's episode is a big deal. You see, this is the last week in September, and if you have watched Comic Class for a while, then you know that on the last week of every single month, I recap all the new DC Rebirth titles that came out. And not only do I give you a recap of those books, I also give you two episodes. One that covers all the brand new titles, and one that gives you an update about how I'm feeling about all the returning titles. And on this episode, we're going to cover all the brand new books that premiered in September. However, we're getting to that point in Rebirth in which there aren't that many more brand new #1 Rebirth issues, so I'm also going to cover all the issues that had a Rebirth issue last month, but had a brand new #1 this month. Rebirth is kind of structured in a confusing way. Translation, we're going to be talking about Cyborg, Supergirl, Trinity, Teen Titans, Batman Beyond, and Blue Beetle. So, let's start with one of my personal favorite characters, a character whose book I have been a little bit hesitant about, Cyborg. Now, as I said, he's one of my favorite characters. When I was growing up, I was a big Teen Titans fan, and Cyborg was one of my favorite members of the Teen Titans, so I have been waiting for him to finally get a series that really captures what I love about his character. The last series was okay, but didn't quite do it for me. But at the same time, I was kind of hesitant about this upcoming series because the guy they have writing it worked on the old 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and that's about it. That's really the last thing of any notice that he really did. So yeah, that seemed like an odd choice, but also the pitch of this book is that it was going to be Cyborg questioning, am I truly man or machine? And when I heard that that was going to be the pitch of this book, guys, that is a great story to be told for Cyborg. However, it's not the only story to be told for Cyborg. Every single time that someone starts up a Cyborg story, they start up his own series, a mini-series, they give him a little sub-story in one of the team books that he's on, it's always that story. And guys, again, enough. We have heard that story. And I'm not saying that you can't have that be a part of his character. It absolutely should be part of his character. I'm not saying that he can't reflect back on when he had his original body, and he can't think about what has happened to him, and he can't get down and depressed about that. I'm just saying that can't always be the story. Think about Spider-Man losing Uncle Ben. Yes, that comes up a lot. He always thinks back to what happened to Uncle Ben. He always thinks about that as the motivation for what he does. However, every single storyline for Spider-Man isn't, could I have gone back and saved Uncle Ben? Oh, what would have happened if I had done something differently? You see, there's a way to have it be a part of their character without having it be the entirety of their character. Now, so far this month, the Rebirth issue and the issue #1 have come out, and in both of them, we see Cyborg going out there and actually being a superhero. In the Rebirth issue, he's stopping this giant living malware virus from trying to destroy something in Star Labs, and in issue 1, we see him stopping a bank robbery, and this is the biggest compliment that I can give this book. When they write Cyborg actually being a superhero, they write him being a superhero. They actually do a pretty good job showing him going out there and actually saving the day, actually fighting these villains, actually using the powers that he has to his advantage. I actually think that they did something really cool in issue #1 in which he stops these bank robbers by calling them on their burner phones and telling them how he was able to backtrack every single step that they went through in this robbery to find exactly where they were. I was like, Man, that is an awesome way to write Cyborg. And I've always said that Cyborg should be written with a little bit of confidence to himself. It kind of drives me nuts when people write Cyborg being completely serious or just being totally silent in a fight because he's thinking so much to himself. Cyborg was a pro high school football player. He was the star player on his team, and now he's going out there being a superhero. Yes, he's in a very different situation in his life, but if he's going out there and saving the day, he should kind of get a little bit of that cockiness to him. He should get some of that confidence back in him. He should get some of that energy back in him, and they actually do write him like that. So yeah, that is the biggest compliment that I can give this book. But then it gets into the whole am I man or machine thing, and I've already covered my problem with that, and I gotta be honest with you, it's nothing new here. It isn't anything new. He discovers in the Rebirth issue a recording from his dad saying, I have to wonder, is that really my son walking around? Or a machine that thinks it's my son? I was like, oh my god, Cyborg, you have been a cyborg for 5 years now. Again, not saying that you can't reflect back on what's happened to you. Not saying that you can't think back and go, I wish I still had my original limbs. That is totally something that your character would do. However, after 5 years, you should know if you're a man or machine at this point. And as I said, I think the way that they write him being a superhero is actually done pretty darn well. However, the way that they write this whole am I man or machine thing, they're not handling it all that well. Like there's a scene in issue number 1 in which he and one of the lab assistants goes out for some ice cream, and these two kids want to pose with him for a picture, which by the way, I absolutely love that. Anytime that you see Cyborg actually hanging out with little kids, I think that's fantastic. As I said, I grew up with that Teen Titans cartoon, and you remember that episode of the Teen Titans cartoon where that kid comes up and he's got a little metallic arm because he lost his real arm, and he goes, look Cyborg, I'm just like you. And he's like, yeah, you sure are, kid. And he's like having a moment with that kid. I'm like, I love that. So I love anytime that you see little kids looking up to and idolizing Cyborg. But there's a moment when she's posing for this picture with these two kids, and one of the kids says, hey, who's that? Is that your girlfriend? And the other kid goes, dummy, Cyborg doesn't have a girlfriend. He's a machine. He doesn't have a heart like a human, so he can't feel love. And when he said that, I was just like, who talks like that? What? Listen, I fully understand a kid coming in here and saying something that would upset Cyborg, but that was just lazy, man. That was just, wow. I can't picture a kid actually saying that. That was just way too on the nose, the exact thing that Cyborg did not need to hear in that moment. It was weird. It was a weird line. But there is one other compliment that I can give this book, which is I said that the way that they handled the whole man versus machine thing, I don't think that's being done all that well. I don't think it's really doing anything original. However, there's one thing original in this. As I said, Cyborg finds this recording of his father saying, is that really my son? Or a machine that thinks it's my son? And then at the end of the Rebirth issue, we see that the big villain of this whole storyline is going to be a machine that thinks it's Cyborg's dad. That's actually original. I haven't seen that before. And actually, if you are going to do the whole man or machine thing, that's actually a pretty good villain to create for that storyline. So I gotta say, at the moment, it is a very book. Like the good kind of evens out the bad. It's kind of going right back and forth. But that premise, and also seeing that he is going to end up going up against pretty much every single robotic villain in the history of DC Universe, it's got me wanting to come back. So that, and also, not gonna lie, my own personal allegiance to that character are going to keep me coming back for at least another month. Next up is Supergirl. Now, the Rebirth issue of Supergirl came out last month, and this month we got issue number 1. And with the Rebirth issue, I said they did a pretty decent job of making it like the TV show, but in all honesty, you needed to kind of make it like the TV show. The Supergirl of the New 52 was so not what people think of when they think of Supergirl, and what they see in the TV show is exactly what they think of when they think of Supergirl. That, yeah, honestly, that's probably the course of action you should have taken with this Rebirth issue. Issue number 1 shows her now living with her new parents and going to this new school, and it's really establishing her new surroundings, and I think they actually do that pretty darn well. I gotta say though, towards the end of the issue though, when she started reflecting on how much she missed Krypton, I don't know why, but I just couldn't connect to any of it. Maybe it's just because this is a book aimed at 16-year-old girls and I'm a 30-year-old man, so maybe it's just not meant for me. But I was finding all the stuff with her there in the new school, and why could I not think of words there? In the new school, with her new home, I found all of that pretty interesting. I wanted to see where it went. I really enjoyed seeing that she actually didn't know how to use Earth technology, and the irony of the fact that she is actually way smarter than anyone else around her. She is actually a genius from a futuristic society, but it'd be like someone handing me an abacus and telling me to do math on it. It's like, actually, abacus is a pretty easy. That's not the best metaphor. You guys know what I mean. It would be like giving an expert chef who has only worked on electric stoves an old wood kindling stove and you go, all right, cook something in there. Yeah, it's not something she's used to. She doesn't know how to work all this technology. She doesn't understand this really primitive form of math and science that we have to deal with. So it did a great job of making her look like the outcast in this new school. And I really want to see how she develops in this new school and the connections that she makes there. But again, for some reason, towards the end of the issue, when she went up to the Fortress of Solitude and she started reflecting on, okay, maybe this is what I should be doing, it just kind of felt cold to me. I didn't really feel a connection to her in that moment. But again, I might just not be the target audience for that. Still, I think that they are doing a great job of establishing the new setting for this new Supergirl and the new tone of this book. So yeah, again, I'm going to keep coming back and checking out this book. Next up is Trinity. Now, this is the first time that Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman have all been featured in their own ongoing series together, and I find that odd. It seems like this should have happened a long time ago. They've had miniseries, they've had one-shots, but yeah, these are the three most iconic characters in all of DC Comics. The Trinity is known far and wide, even among people who don't read comics. So yeah, it's a great idea to finally give them their own series, and it's being written and drawn and basically every single other thing else by Francis Manapul. That's the one thing that everyone in my store could not stop talking about. The fact that we actually had a comic that only had one name under the creators list. Right there on the top, it just says Francis Manapul. That is kind of cool, I gotta admit that. When it comes to Francis Manapul though, I think he's one of the best artists out there. His art is mind-blowing. And when he draws the stuff that he writes, it looks even better. When there is no filter between a different writer and himself, and he can truly experiment, he does some truly amazing stuff. However, as a writer, I think he's okay. I don't think he's bad, I think he's just, decent. But I gotta say, the very first issue of this, the Rebirth issue of Trinity, I think he did a pretty darn good job. The whole premise of this is that the Superman of this world is not the Superman that Wonder Woman and Batman knew. They were friends with their old Superman, but their Superman died. And now all of a sudden, this new, slightly older Superman who's married to a slightly older Lois Lane and they have a kid and they claim to have come from a dying universe into their universe, he's suddenly arrived and he's saying, hey, I'm gonna be Superman now. They feel weirded out by that, but at the same time they're like, yeah, but he's still Superman. We look at this guy, we see what he's doing, we know he's Superman, we know he's here for a good reason, it's time that we actually connect with him. So Wonder Woman and Batman actually go out to Kent's farm to just have dinner with him. And this whole issue is just them connecting. It's just them bonding. And honestly, I kind of love that. Listen, I love comic books that are about heroes going out there and punching supervillains and stopping giant crises. I also just love issues that are about characters connecting. I just love issues that are about characters talking to each other and growing closer to each other, and that's what this whole issue was. And honestly, I really liked how he handled Clark Kent. I really liked the way that he handled Wonder Woman. I think that his Batman was a tad too dickish. I think that when it comes to writing Batman, there is a very fine line between perfect level of dickishness and too much dickishness. I think it went a bit over that, but at the same time, the issue starts off with Clark Kent's son accidentally lighting Batman on fire with his heat vision because he doesn't know how to use it yet, and then Batman has to spend the rest of the issue wearing one of Clark Kent's old hand-me-down plaid farmer shirts. That actually kind of made me laugh. Seeing Bruce Wayne going around in farmer gear, I don't know why, but that made me chuckle, and I actually thought it was a really good gag. So yeah, so far, I think this series is off to a pretty good start. I have no idea what happened at the end of that issue, but I am intrigued to see what happens in the next one. So yeah, Trinity, so far I think it's a success, and I'm definitely coming back for the next one. Okay, now moving into the books that came out this week. Gotta prep myself for this one. I have been loving almost every single book in Rebirth. Even the ones that I'm still not reading, I can at least look at and go, it's being done pretty well. This is the one book that I have to point to and say it's failing at this point. Blue Beetle #1 came out, and last month we got the Rebirth issue, and I read that and I went, I don't really like the way that he's writing the dialogue between these characters, except there are some nice moments between Ted Kord and Jaime Reyes, so it gives me hope, because after all, this is Keith Giffen we're talking about. He's the guy who wrote all the great Ted Kord stuff back in the day, and he also wrote all the really great Jaime Reyes stuff back in the day. He seems like the perfect guy to be writing this. Man, it just ain't working. I hate saying that because I held on to hope after the Rebirth issue. Issue #1 was a mess. It really was. The dialogue between characters is way too quippy. Every single line, he feels like he has to have a quip in response to it and just going back and forth. The first couple pages is Jaime Reyes telling his friend Brenda, which, by the way, it really upsets me to say that this book isn't working because I love that old Jaime Reyes series so much, especially because of Brenda and Paco. They were two of my favorite supporting characters of all time, and I was so excited to see them back. But yeah, it opens up with Jaime describing a dream he had about Dr. Fate fighting a giant beetle in ancient Egypt. And as he's describing this over the course of like 4 pages, all the dialogue between them is just quip, 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 quip. And I'm like, he is telling you about a dream about Dr. Fate fighting a giant beetle. Can we please just be serious for one freaking panel on this? And everything that he writes at the school, among these kids going back and forth, it's just so quippy, like nothing feels real here. And I'm not saying that everything has to be super serious. No. That is not how I want either Blue Beetle to be written, so I am glad that we have someone with a sense of humor coming into this book. But seriously, every single panel, every single exchange of dialogue feels like it is a setup for a quip to be responded. It just got so frustrating and made me look at these characters going, no one talks like this. Even super clever people who are constantly joking back and forth do not talk like this. It was driving me nuts. Like, as I said, in the Rebirth issue, it was kind of charming seeing that quippiness. Sorry, this book is actually hurting me physically. It was actually charming seeing that quippiness between Ted Kord and Jaime Reyes for a couple of panels, but throughout this entire issue, man, it just annoyed me. I could not form an attachment with anybody, and even just the structure of the story itself. Like, we see them mentioning some group called the Posse, but they mention them like we're supposed to already know who they are, and maybe they mentioned it in the last issue and I totally forgot it, but if they did mention it in the last issue, it did not make any kind of an impact, and they just bring it up like we're supposed to know who it is, and they just go into this crime scene like, bam, we're over there right now, things are happening, boop, someone's popping up, and like, oh my god, it is just moving at the weirdest pace, and nothing is set up. Yeah, man, I hate saying it. This really does hurt me saying this, because this is the book that I wanted to succeed the most. This is a failure at this point. It is not working, and I'm really hoping that if this book doesn't end up selling and they have to cancel it, they'll come back one more time and try this again, because Ted Kord and Jaime Reyes working together, I want that to succeed so much. My fist hurt after that. Okay, moving into the last 2 Rebirth issues, starting with Teen Titans Rebirth. This is another book that I really wanted to succeed because, as I mentioned earlier, I have been a fan of the Teen Titans throughout most of my comic book reading life, and it has been a long time since anyone at DC got Teen Titans right. Even before the New 52, the Teen Titans weren't doing all that well, so I've been waiting for that book to finally come in here and finally get the Teen Titans right, and the Rebirth issue was a Rebirth issue. As I've mentioned many times before, the point of these Rebirth one-shots is to introduce new readers to everything you need to know to start reading this series, and when you have a team book and you have to introduce the readers to every single one of these characters, it's kind of hard to really start any kind of a story. And this one doesn't really start any kind of a story. The whole point of this Rebirth one-shot was simply to go, here are the characters who are the members of the Teen Titans. We're going to give each of them maybe 5 pages to tell you a little something about themselves, and then that's it. And that's what you got. I can't really judge this issue, simply because, yeah, I don't really know where the story's going. I don't really know how these characters are going to interact. I don't really know what the premise of this book is. But I do know who these characters are now. However, speaking as someone who already did know who these characters are now, I didn't really get any new information here, so okay. Although I will say, I think that they did a pretty decent job of capturing the different voices of each of these characters, so that's how they're each going to be written, and I think that could be interesting seeing each of them interact. And also, you do get kind of an idea of the premise because we see Damian is the one who gathered them all together to form the team. Spoiler alert for that, but seriously, I think we all knew that that was what was going to happen. I will admit, I always get a little bit frustrated by those people who are like, Batman can take down anyone. I get really frustrated when people say that about Damian. So seeing Damian take down Starfire with just an electric shock, I was like, Starfire is like super powerful and she absorbs energy. How did you take her down with an electric shock? So, okay, that is a one small complaint that I have about the issue, but aside from that, as I said, they did a good job introducing the audiences to these characters. So, how do I feel about the series? I'm just going to have to wait until that issue number 1. And now, for the finale, Batman Beyond Rebirth. As I mentioned, there have been many books in DC that needed Rebirth to come in and fix them, to put them on the right track. Batman Beyond was probably the biggest one of them, because if you were like me and you grew up with that Batman Beyond cartoon, you had a love for that entire world, you had a love for Terry McGinnis, you had a love for all of his supporting characters, for all of his villains, and you could not wait to read about that in this new DC universe. And when they finally created a Batman Beyond book that was set in DC continuity, oh my god, was it the biggest mess. Okay. So you know Terry McGinnis, the kid who discovered that Bruce Wayne was Batman, and then he went out dressed as Batman to try and fight crime and avenge his father's death, and then he ended up becoming Batman full-time, and he was trained by Bruce Wayne. You know, all those great adventures? That was not what you got in the New 52 version of Batman Beyond. That Batman Beyond was a Terry McGinnis who came from a post-apocalyptic future that was overrun by Omax, which are basically like DC's version of the Terminators, and he came back in time to 5 years in our future where he met an older, jaded, retired Tim Drake, and then they formed a bond, but then that Terry McGinnis died, so then that older, 5 years older Tim Drake took the Batman Beyond suit and then time traveled back to his future, but because they changed things now in his past, which is still our future, now their future had been changed, so it wasn't overrun by robots, but they were still evil robots, but there were parts of the Batman Beyond city in there, but also parts of other DC future cities in there. It was as confusing and as much of a mess as what I just described. That is the best job I could have done describing that. I have no idea who at DC thought that was a good idea, because here's the thing. People love Batman for Batman. They love Superman for Superman. They love Wonder Woman for Wonder Woman. They love Batman Beyond for Terry McGinnis. People formed an attachment to that character, and that is a character who is still new enough that people aren't ready for him to have a legacy character, but he's also old enough that people are nostalgic for just that guy. He is that guy who is right at that perfect point in which the older fans and the newer fans just want that guy. And they came in and changed everything about him into something that nobody wanted. So, when I picked up this issue, it's Terry McGinnis in there again, and they make a few small references back to that previous series, but you can tell that whoever was writing this, he had a note posted onto his computer that said, do not say anything about the last series unless you absolutely have to. All you need to know for this new Batman Beyond book is just what you read in the Batman Beyond book. As I have said, the Rebirth issues were supposed to introduce new readers to this. I think this one did a great job because it doesn't explain anything that happened in that previous Batman Beyond series, but at the same time, it still mentions a few things that happened, so for anybody out there who did read and did enjoy it, you still get that. You still get to know that that thing that you read and loved did actually happen. However, for all the new people who want to just start reading and you watch the old cartoon and you just want a fresh jumping on point, this one does a really darn good job of that. Because they come in there and they go, hey, I'm Terry McGinnis, People thought I was dead, but I'm still alive, and I'm now living with my younger brother and taking care of him because our mom passed away, and also, I don't know where Bruce Wayne is. That's all you need to know. You do not need to go back and read that previous series to figure out what he's talking about. No. Just take everything that he just told you and accept it, and then you are good to go. Because the rest of this issue felt like Batman Beyond. I gotta give him that. The whole point of Rebirth is to make DC feel like DC again. Batman Beyond Rebirth felt like Batman Beyond. Just the way that the city is drawn, just the way that Terry McGinnis interacts with his surrounding characters, just the way that they talk and the dialogue and the exchanges that they have, the way that the Jokers are drawn. That was one of the things I loved about Batman Beyond, is that there was a street gang that was obsessed with the Joker and tried to copy everything that he did. Yeah, they're back and they look just like they did back in the cartoon. And okay, I have mentioned many of the twists at the end of these #1 issues just to kind of give you guys an idea of what the series is going to be about. I am not going to say what the twist is at the end of Batman Beyond Rebirth, but it is a darn good twist, and man does it have me excited for where this series goes. So yeah, just speaking as a guy who grew up on that Batman Beyond cartoon, I am really looking forward to where this series goes. That's it for me today, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of the Rebirth Recap. If you want to see the next episode, in which I cover all the returning titles in September and give you a little update about how I feel about them, then it's going to be coming out in a couple days, so you can always click that subscribe to make sure that you don't miss it. Also, if you want to support this channel, the easiest way to do that is simply to share these videos and give us a thumb up in the comments down below. Also, speaking of the comments section, let me know down there how you felt about any of the books that I talked about today. Again, thanks for following me, everyone, and you can always follow me on Twitter and Tumblr to hear my random thoughts about comic books on there. It's at Professor Thorgy, but if you just want to keep watching our videos, then I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.